In today's ever-changing landscape of quick dopamine hits on social media and a lot of noise amongst creators, keeping our audience engaged is more important than ever. People reflexively skip ads and run away from blatant sales pitches, but what do people lean in and listen to? Stories. Think about how tired you are of seeing the same old buzzwords come across your screen. Well, if you're tired, let me tell you, your customers are too. My guest today is Akua Konadu, a storytelling strategist and social media educator. She helps business owners lean into their gifts and create stories that engage with their audience and drive meaningful connections on social media. She's also the host of the independent business podcast powered by Honeybook, where she breaks down the science of self-made success. In our conversation today, Akua is teaching us how to become our business and brand's best storytellers and captivate the attention of our target customers. They can't like and trust your offers until they know you. Storytelling techniques aren't just for the brands with big stories to tell, they're also for you. Keep listening to learn Akua's fresh approach to being story forward in your marketing. And without further ado, Akua, welcome to the Gold Digger Podcast. I am so excited about today's episode. I feel like this has been a while in the making, and with someone that I feel like I should have known a long time ago. Akua, welcome to the Gold Digger Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. We're going to be cutting up, girl. It's going to be a fun time.
That's right. Okay. We have to talk about this. So you recently posted something on Instagram and it totally caught my attention.
Yeah.
And I want to start here. So you shared in 2024, people want receipts, meaning that it is so important to back up what you are saying with data. Can we talk a little bit more why you posted that? Because I thought it was so poignant and also so true.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I work a lot with social media, storytelling strategy in social media. And one thing that I've always just noticed is that social media has been consistently evolving, but one of the main things that has always stayed the same has been storytelling. But the way that we share stories has officially changed. And I feel like ever since the pandemic, especially from the pandemic to now, the landscape of entrepreneurship has also changed. We're a lot more skeptical. We really want to align ourselves with brands that truly align with our values, right? Yeah. And also too, if I'm going to invest in you, you got to show me that your process is repeatable and provable, right? We hear all the time, make 6 figures in your business. We hear that all the time. All right, cool. But how? And what are the numbers to actually show that so that I can see that this is possible for me? I think, again, a lot of the times we can tell now more than ever when people aren't being genuine, when people are just saying things just to say things. And I think people want honesty, more realness, transparency, rawness. I think a lot of us really want that. And so being honest about your business in all facets and bringing those receipts, I think really allows your audience to trust you more, respect you more, and be like, all right, this is realistically what she can do. So now I can see that this can be done for me as well.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I love this. I also think too, people throw out numbers and you're like, there's huge difference between what income means. Are we talking net here? What does this actually mean and look like? And so I totally agree on this. You are an expert at storytelling. I think you hit it so hard in a unique way. And so often when we talk about storytelling, we talk about origin stories, right? I'm pretty sure that 90% of my listeners could recite the $300 camera on Craigslist, yada, yada, yada. So I want to first just start with origin stories for somebody that's listening that's maybe at the beginning stages of starting a business and they're like, I am in my origin story, or I don't know how to even make what I'm trying to do into a story. Yeah. Why are origin stories so powerful and how do we start to nail them down?
Yeah, origin stories are so powerful because I think, number one, it really humanizes who you are as a brand. I have had people that have booked with me just literally hearing my story and you've aligned with my values, I want to work with you. And so I do think it's a really, really great way to nurture your audience, for people to get to know you more, your business. A lot of times we'll just share the journey just to share the journey. But I feel like sometimes we're missing that piece of sharing your purpose as to why you started your business. Sharing your values, I think, are so, so important when you're really creating that origin story. And I think for me, the questions, I remembered my own journey of when I was creating my own story. And I remember asking myself of like, Akua, what is it that you want to be known for? Because I didn't start out as a storytelling strategist, right? Like I started out leaning more into social media management, Instagram, those types of things. And so as I was doing that and molding myself as a business owner, I like realized like, I love this, but I'm still missing something. So like really doing the work of myself, of grounding myself, like, Akua, what do I actually really like to do in my business? What inspires me? What lights me up, sets my soul on fire? You know what I mean? But like gets me activated. And so I really started to take notes of those things and documenting that. And then I realized, I'm like, oh my gosh, I see this gap in the industry of storytelling. And so I literally documented that whole process of my own origin story. So really asking yourself, what is it that you want to be known for? What inspired you to create the thing that you now sell, right? Yeah. What is your passion behind your business? Those things are some really, really key things to ask yourself as you're creating your origin story. But I do want to add to this too. I love the origin story, but I do think, like to your point, we need to start going beyond that. But there are some ways to really beef up your origin story, right? Yeah. To where it can work to in today's market of like what we're doing now. So one thing about me with how I do storytelling, I have all my stories written out. I have my storytelling library. Wow. And I will always go back and reread my stories and pull out certain pieces of like, ooh, because like when you have your stories laid out, it leads to a plethora of repurposed content in so many different ways that you don't even realize. Just by having these same stories, I'll go back and reread it and it will pull out different ideas. Like there's this specific piece in my story that I remember, like me sitting in a coffee shop, realizing that like there's more to my life, that like what I'm doing now isn't aligned with me. Like, you know, just those little pieces of my story, remembering that and like putting myself back in that situation and being like, how can I tie that back to my target audience and my business? And so that's essentially how I do that. So with your origin story, what you can do is go back and really look at certain pieces, look at the challenges, the lessons that you've learned, your wins, your losses, and how can you translate that back to your target audience, right? How can you explain those pieces to where it's going to serve them? Another thing that I love to do is really, again, look at it and what lessons have you learned that has inspired a certain framework that you've created, right? Again, that's another way to really beef up your origin story and make it more meatier, make it less fluffy, have more substance to it. And another thing that I absolutely love is like your origin story should be evolving with you. And I think we forget that. We forget that a lot because we are always highlighting our past triumphs. But things shift. Your target audience shifts. You're not the same person that you were yesterday. You're not going to be the same person tomorrow. So you need to be shifting it and improving it because again, I didn't start out as a storytelling strategist. I started off not having a business, not even knowing what I wanted to do, finally going to social media management, then finally deciding, all right, let's stick with storytelling strategist, right? Like you're evolving constantly. Yeah. So your origin story should be evolving with you to exactly to the point that you're at today. So constantly revisiting that consistently, and so that you can add more substance because you're learning new things that you didn't have in there before. It really just like opens your eyes and really just like opens like the possibilities when you're creating your content.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's so much goodness that you just were talking about. One thing that I have on my phone is a note. And like whenever I tell an interesting story or like someone's like, wait, what? Like I was telling this story the other day about how as kids, we really wanted to buy new bikes and my parents weren't going to buy them for us. And so my mom called the city of Duluth and asked if we could face paint at like this race, like there's this festival happening. And she's like, can we set up a booth and my kids are going to use paint on people's faces and do these fun little designs to earn money to buy bikes? And they said, sure. And so here we were like young little kids doing face painting with no experience, but it was to earn our bike. And I like told that story and someone was like, that is the most fascinating story. And I was like, ooh, I got to add that to my notes app. Like, that's a great story, right? And so pay attention when you're in conversation with people to the things that like you start talking about and make a log. I think it's so smart, Akua. Like, walk me through, what does your kind of arsenal of stories look like and how do you curate them? Or like, what makes you think like, oh, this is when I got to dive deeper on?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. But I want to add to that because that is one of the best ways to become a phenomenal storyteller is learning how to collect stories.
Yes.
It absolutely is, because we are in our day-to-day, every day, moving, hustling, you know, and I hear this all the time. People be like, Akua, I don't have anything to share.
Yeah.
Your whole life is a story. Every single day that you are waking up, you are in a story.
Yeah.
And so really taking that time to be more present, really think about what's going on in your day. My best ideas come to me in the shower. My phone is in the shower with me, like right there, because I'll be like, oh, I just remember this conversation that I just had with somebody with coffee. Like, this was amazing. Or like, again, I have been, even me myself, I'm guilty of that sometimes too. And I actually really take that time to either journal or just sit and ground myself. But then I'm realizing, I'm like, oh my gosh, I had this little thing that happened and I want to lean into that. Like, I don't have any kids. I have a dog. He's the love of my life. His name is Kai. And, this is just an example. He has no decorum. Okay. He's wild. He's a puppy. We're still training. I have learned a lot about myself, but it was just funny because, I drop him off at daycare and they've told me, they were like, Kai is very bold. He's fearless. He really gets a lot of dogs out of his shell. And I was talking to my mom about it the other day and she was like, well, you're kind of like that. And I was like, what? And she was like, well, you always love to make people feel included and you're just kind of out there. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, that's true. And so that little instance was a reminder for me of okay, how can I tie this back to my business of encouraging people to be more bold, encouraging how can people feel seen in my content, those little types of things. And so sharing that story, right? And again, driving it right back to my target audience. We always feel with storytelling, there has to be these major things that happen in my life and this and that. But the most relatable, most impactful stories are the everyday things that we consider the most mundane.
Yes.
And so I just wanted to add into that. Sorry. And I even just lost the question that you just asked me from that whole ramble.
I was just no, that was great. And I agree with that. And I think too, I remember when I was in the process of writing my book, you start to see the world in a different way. And I also feel like life shifts in a beautiful way because you're kind of thinking back of how could this help somebody else? Or what is the meaning? Or why am I learning this lesson? It just makes you more inquisitive in your own life and just more reflective in general. But the question is how do you create a library of stories? When people hear that, if they're not like you and I and thinking in stories, they're probably I have 2 stories I can tell, 2 go-to stories when I'm awkward at a meetup with other people. And so how can they start to build out a library of stories?
Oh, yeah. But I think even 2 stories is great because you already have a boatload of content from that. So, you know what I mean? I think even just using those 2 stories, just to even use that as a foundation to make more. Journaling is huge for me. So I will literally just sit down and just talk about different stages of my life and what has that curated for me, right? Because we are more than our businesses. Again, really sit down and just think of your life stages of what certain areas in your life that were very impactful that you think that your target audience would find value. You know what I mean? Also too, think of your client customer journey story. If you have your products and services that you really want to lean into, really take that time to create that journey for them. What are every single step? Have that mapped out that you want them to take of here they are. And if they work with you, this is the impact that they're going to have. So really bring them in that with you and just, again, map that all out. I like to ask myself certain questions leading from a place of curiosity. I think, again, right, it makes you more inquisitive and it makes you think of things in a different perspective that you never thought were possible. So again, that's what I do. Journaling is huge for me. I love to just reflect in the different seasons of my life of what's going on, even when I'm goal setting, what worked, what didn't work. You can find stories within that. You know what I mean? Of here's some things that I learned about myself as a business owner. Here are some projects of this is what I learned. This is what I didn't learn. And you can lean into some of those things to create content. Stories are, again, all around you all the time. You just have to lean into a place of curiosity and be open to receive and be open to just anything that's going on. So I hope that helps with at least how to start with that.
Yeah. You said something earlier that I think is so powerful and so many people are missing these days. And you were talking about how the story was being documented the entire time it was happening. And I feel like we live in this culture, especially today, where people want to wait to tell the story until they have it all figured out. And honestly, having it all figured out is not relatable. The parts that you don't have it figured out, that is what is going to resonate so much deeper. And I don't know if you've ever had an experience like this, Akua, but I've had so many where I'm I wish it would have taken more pictures when I was setting up the janky podcast setup in the closet, or when I hit record the first time in my car, just different things like that, where there's so much in our brains of this isn't pretty enough, or it's not perfect enough, or I can't wait till I show the studio. And it's no, people are going to relate so much more. And so I think it's a great reminder and a challenge to our listeners of document today, where you're at. You are going to be so grateful, whether you share it publicly or you keep it for your own personal just memory bank. That is the power of storytelling. And I think that people that have been able to grow really strong brands with communities who would just love them are the people that have been showing the story as it's unfolding and not waiting to arrive. Would you agree or disagree?
Oh, 1000%. And I think that's, again, to your point, especially with social media, we see people who, they have this beautiful curated feed, but it's like, you don't know what it took for them to get there.
Yes.
And just because you discovered them today, right, and you see them that they're successful,
right,
that does not mean like they started at the same point that you were. But we miss that. We miss bringing people into the conversation. I just saw a post the other day from one of my friends. Her name's Angelica, and she's a photographer, and she shared this very honest post, and she just was like, look, I'm going to keep it real, because her feed is beautiful. Everything's gorgeous. And she just said, I have not been getting any inquiries. Like, I have not been getting a lot. I have not hit my revenue goals. Like, my business is not where it was. And the funny thing is that there have been a lot of conversations that have been happening in the industry this year about people that are like, their businesses are just not hitting what they originally thought, right? Like, and so she brought that to the forefront, and that sparked so many conversations where so many people were like, I see that too. I'm cheering you on. Like, we're in this together. And like, when you just know that you have people that are walking alongside the same journey that you are, it's just so different, and just such amazing magic is created. And so like, when you're bringing people into that journey with you as you're creating your course, as you're, getting ready to sell your services, be honest, be like, hey, I'm creating a course, and like, tell people that, and get people excited and bring them alongside you. So then like, when you are ready to launch, they're already expecting it, and they're excited because they've seen the work that you have put into it. They've seen how like you put your audience first to give them something that's truly going to impact their lives. Like, I always like to remind myself, like, when people invest in my business, it is truly a gift. Like, the fact that you trusted me was such a vulnerable piece of like your story. I don't care if it's like super, nothing big. Either way, you're trusting me with your story. And I find that that's just such a big gift. So when you're investing in me, I take it so seriously. And I think we all do as business owners. And so that's something that I truly do believe, like, bringing people, leading with transparency, honesty. Like, if you're comfortable with like, hey, I didn't hit my revenue goals, this is what it was, and this is what I actually made. I think so many of us really appreciate that. You know what I mean? Because
totally,
we all want authenticity. I hate that word. It's so trendy, but it's
true.
But it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. I think we want realness. We want rawness. We want on these private conversations that we're having in these rooms with each other about our businesses. People want that, more of that at the forefront. And I think storytelling is such a great way to do that. And it really does the heavy lifting for you when it comes to selling your products and services. So those are some of my thoughts.
I couldn't agree more. I also see sometimes like when like recently a local business announced that it was closing, and like we were frequent customers of it. And I'm like, I wish I would have known they were even in that place. Like, we would have changed our behavior. And so like when Angelica shares that, then it's like, oh, past clients can refer. Like, you don't know what you don't know. And so I just think too that there is this like small business, like deep desire to support one another. But if we don't know what people need, we can't show up. And so I love that example. Is just a reminder of like, what you see on social media is not always real. Like that, we have to remember that. So I want to know, Akua, let's say that somebody that's listening, they hire you and they want to work with you. Yeah. What are some of the questions that you would ask to help draw out stories? Because I just know, even though you and I are like telling people, you have a bajillion stories living inside of you in your life. There are people thinking, I'm too boring. Nobody cares. They don't want to know. So what are some questions that might get a listener starting to think a little bit differently about the stories that they could be telling online?
Oh my gosh. Something, like I said it earlier. I think, again, you have to just do it really like introspectively, like ask yourself, like, what excites you? Yes. Exactly. Like, what are some things that if you were to sit down with a friend, somebody that you just met, what are some things in your business that you feel like you could talk about for ages, right? Like, I think that's such a really, really great way to start. Another question, because storytelling that is so important, is invoking some type of emotion. Mm-hmm. I love to ask people, how do you want people to feel when they've interacted with your brand? What are the things that you want people to say when you're not in the room, after they have interacted, after they've heard your story, after they've worked with you? Like, what are the things of like, how you want people to feel? What do you want them to do? Because emotions are just so key in storytelling. If you want anybody to do anything, which kind of sounds low-key manipulative, but if you want them to do anything, you need to literally lean into empathy. People need to be able to see themselves inside your story. So really asking yourself, number one, what inspires me? What excites me to talk about? How do I want people to feel after they've really interacted with me? What do I want people to take away from the story? What do I want people to do after they've heard it? You know what I mean? I think really asking yourself those key things can really just open up a lot of doors. I used to really just share these type, like, we can have these different types of stories where you have your origin story, your client customer journey story, your why story, and you can have those things. But I also noticed that people also put themselves in a box. Yes. And so I'm like, storytelling can be anything that you make it, anything. Like you have the power to make it any way that you want it to be. There's no wrong way. I think the wrong way is like, how do you strategically share it? That's like where you get into strategy, but you can have any story that you want and really relate it back to your business. And so really asking yourself those things of like, what excites you? What brings you joy? And then also too, like, what does your audience need to hear from you? Really putting your audience first is so key, because in my intensive, we have this target audience analysis, and target audience, it's such an elementary thing, but it truly is such a key thing in your business. And I don't care how long you've been in business, whether a day or 10 years. Anytime I've had clients that come in and work with me in that intensive, I have them fill out that target audience analysis, and I can easily pick out gaps of like areas that they're missing within their target audience. So like really asking them again, like, what are their pain points? These are like very basic things. We hear it all the time. But if you're on social media and you're doing everything right, but you're still not getting sales or anything like that, that's where you're getting into a communication issue, right? Like, how are you communicating with people? And so that exercise really opens that door of like, what language do I want to be using in my stories, right? Like just getting more of that strategy piece. And so really knowing who your target audience is and being clear as day on like what keeps them up at night, but really looking at them from a holistic standpoint. So like, instead of like, okay, yes, your business is serving this specific area of their life, but like, how does that impact all areas of their life? Are you saving time when they can go spend more time with their family? Those things are what matters to people, getting deep as possible so that you're really uncovering the real problem of why they're coming to you. And so they're saying like, yeah, I want help with social media, but really what they're saying is, I want to have more time to do the things that bring me joy. That's what they're really saying. You know what I mean? And so really asking yourself some of these deep core questions, and also too with your target audience, can really help you start formulating a lot of these stories.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. You just hit the nail on the head. We recently had a launch for my Pinterest program, and I love Pinterest. It's great, but I really love Pinterest because it takes 1 hour a week, which means I get a lot of hours back. And it was so interesting looking at the marketing of it, because we were kind of hitting it from all different angles. And, you know, time and money are the two like most common denominators for a lot of marketing, right? But it was so interesting because instead of just talking about Pinterest, when we were talking about just time in general, that resonated so much deeper than me trying to be like, you need to get on Pinterest and to do this thing. And so it's so interesting because I think a lot of times with marketing, especially when we go to sell something, we try to hit it so on the head, right? And clarity is great with communication. Totally not saying that it's not. But if you're not actually asking yourself, like, what is the end result that someone can expect? And how do I communicate that versus the thing? They don't know why they should care about the thing if they don't really connect with the end result. It was just so interesting looking at the marketing, because I think that I see so many people in my community who are incredible at serving. And it's just like, you know, everyone has these like servant hearts. It's amazing. And the minute they go to sell, they're so on the head that it falls flat. And then they're like, selling doesn't work. What would you say? Do you see this too? Because I'm like, I can't be the only one seeing this.
1000%. 1000%. And like, that's the thing. That's why I love storytelling, because I was one of those people.
Yes.
That's me.
Yes.
That was me. Lead with serving first. Like, especially as you're a business owner, we like, it's just selling just, oh, like, right. You're just like, oh, I'm cringing, but it's like, hey, bills got to be paid. I got to eat. And so it's like, you eventually have to make that shift, but that was me. That's truly why I love storytelling so much, is because it made it so much easier for me to sell. I literally just talked about what I was doing in my journey to this day, like literally what I'm doing, what's happening, and bringing people alongside that journey with me to then, like, when I did sell, people signed up. People were like, yes, absolutely. Like, and I think that's just what's so powerful about it. It truly does, like, really thinking about, again, I'm going to bring it right back to your target audience, really thinking about that pain point, because to your point, like, people be like to me, like, okay, I want to work with you. And I'll be honest, my service is exclusive, because I really do. You have to be at a certain place in your business to be able to work with me, because also too, we going to put in the work. Okay. You're going to put in the time and the work, because it truly is, it takes a while to create these stories. You know, you have to take that time to really, again, create these impactful stories so that you can create content with confidence, to where you're not sharing in a way of like, well, I feel like I have to share this because my target audience is asking for it, but like, it feels aligned and feels really good to you. And so those things take time. And so again, you have to really just bring it right back to your target audience. And then again, like, how can you position it to them where they can see themselves in the story? We hear this all the time, like, how can you see them as the hero? I know we've all heard that, but it's so true. You have to bring people into your story where it's not like, hey, look at me. It's like, hey, learn from me. See yourself in me, right? Bringing people along with that. Again, I'm going to bring it right back, hand in hand. We're walking through this together. I'm going to help you get to where you need to get to, because people be like, hey, I want to work with you. I'm like, all right, cool. Like, I want to share stories. Why? Why do you want to share stories? I always ask people that
Yes.
tell me, well, I want to grow my business. Okay, for what? Why do you want to grow your business? And then they'll tell me, and I'm like, go deeper. Like, is it so I can put food on the table, so I can support my family, so that I can be able to build a team and make an impact? Like, those are the reasons why you want to tell me why you want to share your story. Okay, so now let's unpack that together. Like, I think when you, again, put with meaning of like, this is the reason why I want to do this, where you're looking at it holistically of how it can heavily impact your life, it really does make a difference with selling. So look at it again with, how is this going to impact them? This specific transformation, how is it going to heavily impact their life? And that's just like one of the main things that I continue just to drive home.
One thing that I think people get so wrong about storytelling, and I want to know your creative edge on this, is that people think if they told a story once, they should never tell it again. So they'll be like, I told this back in my podcast, episode number 6, and I'm never going to talk about it again. And I even remember when I was writing my book, it was like finding this balance of like the tried and true stories that really are the core stories of my journey, and then also mixing in things people had never heard. And I remember my editor said to me, she's like, when you go to a concert, you want to hear their greatest hits, right? You kind of get mad when they're testing out new material and you paid money to go to the concert. And it reminded me of like, we need to tell our stories again and again and again and again. So what are some ways that we can do this? Or like, what are people getting wrong with that? Because I feel like so many people assume that everybody sees every piece of content, therefore they've already heard it, when there is a very, very, very good chance that they have no idea what you're talking about.
1000%. That again, there is power in repurposing your content. We all know this, right? And storytelling helps you repurpose in so many ways.
Yeah.
And you can share the same thing, you just share it in a different way. Yeah. So one thing that I always love to say is that storytelling just isn't linear. We naturally think, right? Okay, like a story has a beginning, a middle, and end. But who says you have to start your story in the beginning?
Yes. Yes.
Who says that?
Yes.
Nobody. You can start it in the middle, create a great hook, and keep it going. You know what I mean? Again, in different ways. You don't have to start at the very beginning of like, I was born in 1988. It was a rainy Sunday morning. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. We ain't got the time, honey.
Only your mom cares.
Right? Only your mom cares. Okay, right? You have a short amount of time to be able to make an impact. So like, again, look at your library, really sit down and look at your story and like, again, read it and look and like, there's a specific point here. Like, ooh, if it all of a sudden like sparks an emotion in you, okay, well, let's hone into that. What do you feel at this specific part in your story? And I'll use my own story as an example. So a little bit of my background, I fell into my business through pageantry. I was a former Miss Minnesota International, and that's essentially what like sparked me into wanting to work in social media. I was in college with biology degree with a minor in chemistry, wanting to go to med school, and I decided really late in the game that I was like, this isn't what I want to do anymore. And my mom was like, you're going to graduate and get this piece of paper, like regardless. I don't care what you do. And so I decided to find myself in a coffee shop trying to like Google and all of those different types of things, which then I met a friend who is one of my best friends today, all through Google, who has helped me build the business I have today. And so look at that. You just heard that story, right? Okay, well, now let's break it down piece by piece. How was it that experience with Miss Minnesota? Like, what was that specific in that journey for me that really was impactful that I can relay back to business owners? Well, that's where I learned just how powerful storytelling is. That's where I learned how storytelling can really remove barriers where people from, it didn't matter their race, age, socioeconomic status, they could relate to me in some capacity. So that's where I learned that everybody has a story. That's where I learned that business owners, when you share a story with impact, it can truly make a difference. So do you see how I took a little piece of my story and then brought it right back to my business? Like that was just like a prime example of that. And so I think, again, going back and looking at your story, rereading it, pull out some key parts that are going to be impactful, and how can you bring that back to your target audience? Like that's how I do it, because then that's how I'm able to get so many different pieces of content all the time. Right. And if you have like your content pillars that you teach, does this relate back to my content pillar? That is a really great way, a great marker to be like, is this going to be relevant to my target audience?
Yeah.
If my content pillar is community, or, or however specific you want to get with it, does it relate back to my content pillar? Yes. All right, let's lean in and let's share that story. So that's kind of how I feel like there's like so many different pieces, but that's how I personally produce my content.
Yes. Well, and we always talk about like, how can you take one piece of content and promote it 10 different ways? Same thing goes for stories. Like you could tell the story about the conversation with your mom. You could tell the story about the coffee shop. You could tell the story of meeting the friend. You could tell the story of getting the piece of paper and what you realized when you got it. Like in that one story, there's easily 10 other stories.
10 other stories. Yes. That's literally what it is.
And
Perfectly.
it's just these reminders of like, this is where Akua came from. This is what matters. This is what she thought. This is what she overcame. And I think that's where we get it so wrong, is that like we tell the story once and we're done with it, or we don't have the time to refine it or dig deeper on it. And there's so much power in being inquisitive. You've brought this word up so many times. And I think that so often we're like in the grind, or we have this system, or we have the rhythms, that we're never actually pausing to be like, what is the point of this? Or what am I learning from this? Or what is actually the hardest part about all of this? And that's where the stories live. And so I think it's a great reminder to just like pause and be a little bit more curious and ask yourself those questions, or listen to this episode and listen to Akua ask you those questions. But I think it's so great. What would you say, like when we talk about storytelling to drive sales? So, you know, we kind of brought it up with like my recent launch of like, okay, I love Pinterest, but somebody doesn't know why they should love Pinterest until I start talking about the concept of time and saving time. How do you incorporate storytelling into sales so that people aren't just going like, okay, now I've got to sell the product, so I'm going to talk about the features of the product, and they kind of ditch the whole framework that maybe got them success and engagement in the first place?
1000%. I know personally for me, like the reason why I created my intensive is because I actually walked through it myself when I built it. And so when you're talking about some of these features and stuff like that, the services that you have, anything that you sell, whether you've tested it with your audience or if you've walked through it yourself, I will instantly create stories from those features. So like, how has this feature like impacted my life? So I'll even just use HoneyBook as an example. You know, we have our AI email composer that I just love. And that has impacted me greatly because I hate email. I hate email. And so what I love about it for me with like creating these systems in my business was that it saves me time, right? So now I'm talking about a feature, but I'm talking about it in a way, again, where it heavily benefits me and it impacts my life. So similarly with me being a storytelling strategist, like I want to help people share their stories that are impactful. So the way that I do, I'm talking about specific features, like, right, like creating your storytelling library, your target audience analysis, your messaging analysis. I talk about these 3 specific things, but again, of like, when you walk through my messaging analysis, you'll never ever have to question how you show up on social media. You're going to be able to show up feeling so confident and assured in who you are, where you're creating content that aligns with you, to where it really removes, again, that heavy lifting of you having to sell your products and services. So again, to where then you are excited to sell, and to where like now you feel more confident as a business owner. So again, like really honing it back into who it is that you want to speak to, like how you're using a specific feature or something that you know is going to really benefit your audience, and tie it back to them, and how it really is going to positively impact them is so, so key. I think also too, transparency. I'm going to bring it right back to that. People want to see that your process is proven and repeatable. So again, how are you showing that data? How can you implement that data, those numbers in there if it's possible? Using people that you've worked with are a great way to really, you want to be able to create evangelists through that, right? To where like, how can you leverage those people where they can share the story also for you? So really leaning into those pieces too, to where, again, it just really makes it a lot easier selling. Like that's for me how I personally do it. I'm always like, all right, I have this specific feature. This is how it's going to greatly impact you beyond just holistically in your whole life. And this is why I think that you should work with me. And then what are the numbers that I can show of like, this is what truly works? And how, again, bringing people to where they can see themselves in my journey.
Yeah. It's so funny because I mean, I've been doing webinars for almost a decade, and somewhere along the way, I like cut out all the stories because I was like, I just want to give people the content they need. I want to get them the results and all these things. And like, I don't want any fluff in my webinars. And I think, you know, that's a very worthy idea. And it was so interesting because over the last few years, I've started incorporating more stories into the webinars, and they not only convert better, but they resonate. Like people remember the stories more than the content. And so it's so interesting because I think too, so many of us were like, people's attention spans are so small and all these things. But like, I even think of like sitting in a sermon at church. Like I remember the story sometimes more than I remember the scripture, right?
Yes.
And so it's like people remember and cling to stories. And like you said, they start to imagine themselves in it. And so if you are someone who maybe like me, you're like, I just want to give people the systems and the strategies and the tactics and the tools, like the story is a part of that remembering and also a part of it resonating so that they actually do implement.
1000%. I mean, you completely nailed it on the head. Yes. I think we recall facts up to 22 times more when it's in a story.
Yes.
So when you're selling your products and services, you have to remember you have to make people care, because you'd be like, yeah, I built this thing. It's amazing.
Right.
And you're so excited about it. And then you sell it
like,
and
why?
nobody gives a damn.
Yeah.
People are like, what's going on? You have to make people care about what it is that you're selling. And the way to do that is through stories, really impactful stories. And so I think your webinar is just a classic point of that, of like, if you can weave some of these benefits into a story, people are going to remember it. So even if they're like, hey, I don't buy today, they're going to remember it. And when they are ready to purchase, they know exactly who to go to, because you shared these impactful stories, and that's what they're going to remember and hold on to be like, oh my gosh, I remember she shared this story. I'm gonna go back and look, and then boom, they've purchased from you. So like, again, it's so impactful.
Final question. So if somebody is listening to this and they haven't even considered telling their story, I think a lot of people listening have an idea, a dream, a vision. They're waiting to launch until it's all ready to go to say, voila, look at me, I did it. And they haven't even started. What is one prompt that could maybe get them to start sharing their story, even while they are a work in progress, which, by the way, we all are?
I think the one prompt I would probably ask people, because I want people to really get better at collecting the stories and feeling more confident too, I would just ask people just to document what you did today. Yes. What did I do today?
Yes.
What did I do today? Just keeping it simple and just writing that down, or take notes or bullet points. I don't care, but document what you did today. It's okay if you don't have anything today. Just put whatever, like even if it's nothing that sparks anything, but keep doing that. What did I do today? Because then I'm like, did you have an impactful conversation with a friend, or did something really funny happen that could all of a sudden spark some type of creativity or curiosity with you that you want to lean into it more? I think, again, just starting really small, and storytelling is a muscle. That's something I really want to remind people. I was never a good storyteller myself. I truly learned through my own journey in pageantry and beyond. And I'm still every day learning, even as an educator myself. And so I bring to myself, I'm like, I don't have it all figured out. I'm not going to lie to you. And we are going to figure it out together. I'm going to help and build this in a way that feels really good to you. So like, it's a muscle that you just have to keep working, and you have to get confident. And another thing that I always love to share with people is that honor yourself as well in the process, because we feel like all the time that I have to share all of these really personal things in my life, and you don't have to. It's, if you want to, great. I'm more of an open book, but some people aren't, and they get immediately discouraged. And I'm like, really think about what your boundaries are and how you want to honor yourself in that, because you still deserve to have privacy if you feel the need to. But again, it's a beautiful journey, and I don't want people to get so caught up in overthinking it. What did I do today? Ask yourself that. And what are some things what you create when you're writing that down, of like, what is it that sparks curiosity? What is it that gets you excited? I just want to bring it back to those things. And so that's the one thing that I would say. And then just honor yourself in that process.
Akua, where can everybody find out more about you, connect with you, tune into your podcast? Give us all the places.
Yes. So you can connect with me. I'm always at Instagram at Akua Konadu _, or you can hang out with me on my website, akuakonadu.com, or hang out with me at the Independent Business Podcast powered by HoneyBook. So I've loved this conversation. So thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Thank you for coming on the Goal Digger podcast. This was amazing. Yes. Stories are so powerful. And if you are someone listening to this, you have a story to tell. I know that we all say that. And I know that you are likely a listener thinking, but Jenna, you don't know how boring I am. But boring is relatable. And there are so many pieces of your life and what you're working on that could be used as stories to connect you with the people that you are creating for. I love telling stories. I love writing them. I love sharing them. I love thinking about them, and I love reflecting on them. And so take Akua's approach of being just a little more curious and introspective today, and you are going to start to see all of the stories in your own life and begin to tell them in a meaningful and impactful way. I promise you, your business will change when you start to tell more stories. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Goal Digger podcast. I hope you loved today's show as much as I did. And of course, until next time, keep on digging your biggest goals.